Welcome back to the archive. Today, something that happened in every American summer for 20 years and then stopped because of a dime. Not one dime, not 1,000 dimes. 27 million dimes sent by ordinary Americans in ordinary envelopes to the White House, by hand, by mail, one envelope at a time. The largest grassroots fundraising campaign in American history before crowdfunding existed, before the internet existed, before anyone had a word for what they were doing. They were just sending dimes because their children were dying, and the government couldn't stop it, and the hospitals couldn't stop it, and the doctors couldn't stop it. And so, ordinary Americans decided to stop it themselves, one dime at a time. This is not a story about a vaccine. This is a story about what Americans do when the thing they fear most comes for their children. And the answer? They send dimes. I'm Paul. Welcome back. Let's open the record.
Her name was Dorothy Mills. She was 34 years old in the summer of 1952. She lived in Cincinnati, Ohio. She had 3 children, the oldest, Robert, 9 years old, the middle, Carol, 7, the youngest, Thomas, 4. She worked part-time at the school office while the children were in class. Her husband, Harold, worked at the Procter & Gamble plant on the east side. They were not rich, they were not poor. They were exactly what America was in 1952, a family making its way in the post-war boom. They had a house, they had a car, they had a television. And in the summer of 1952, they had a fear. The same fear that every American parent had every summer for 20 years. The fear of polio. Dorothy Mills did not know what polio was when she married Harold in 1941. By 1952, she knew exactly what it was. Every American parent did.
Let me show you what polio was, because it is easy now to forget what it felt like to live inside it. Polio, poliomyelitis, is a virus. It spreads through contaminated water, through contact, through the ordinary touching and sharing of children's lives. In most people, it produces mild symptoms or no symptoms at all. In some people, mostly children, it attacks the nervous system. It paralyzes the legs, the arms, the muscles that control breathing. There was no treatment. There was no cure. You got it or you didn't. If you got the severe form, you survived in a wheelchair, or you survived in an iron lung, a metal tube that breathed for you, that you lived inside for years, sometimes for the rest of your life, or you didn't survive. The peak year, 1952, 57,628 cases in the United States, 3,145 deaths, 21,000 left with some degree of permanent paralysis. In 1 year, in one country. And the worst part, the part that made the fear unlike any other fear, was the summer. Polio was a summer disease. Every June, parents across America began watching. Every July, the cases started climbing. Every August, swimming pools closed, movie theaters closed, church camps canceled, schools postponed their openings. Children stayed home. Children did not play with other children. Mothers watched their children for the first sign. The first sign, a stiff neck, a fever, an unusual tiredness. If you saw it, you called the doctor. The doctor came. And then you waited to see which kind your child had. Dorothy Mills watched every summer. She closed her windows because she had heard, incorrectly, but she had heard, that the virus spread through the air. She didn't let Robert go to the public pool in July. She watched Thomas every morning for a stiff neck. This was American summer for 20 years.
I want to take you to one morning in Cincinnati, Ohio, August 7th, 1952. Dorothy Mills wakes before the children. She does this every morning in summer, before she makes breakfast, before the day starts. She walks to each bedroom. She looks at each child. She looks at how they are sleeping, whether they seem comfortable, whether anything seems wrong. Thomas, 4 years old, sleeping peacefully. She watches his chest rise and fall. She adjusts his blanket. Carol, 7, on her side, one arm hanging off the bed. Dorothy puts it back. Robert, 9, on his back, his breathing even, his color normal. She exhales. Another morning, another day. She goes to the kitchen. She makes breakfast. She does not tell Harold about the morning checks. He knows. She knows he knows. Neither of them talks about it, because talking about it makes it more real, and it is already real enough. At 9 a.m., Robert goes to the neighbor's yard to play with Jimmy Kowalski. At 10 a.m., Dorothy calls Robert back inside. Jimmy Kowalski had been at the public pool on Saturday. She doesn't explain this to Robert. She just calls him inside. Robert is annoyed. He's 9. He doesn't understand. Dorothy understands. She has been reading the Cincinnati Enquirer every morning. The case count climbing all summer. This is August, the worst month, the month she is most afraid. At noon, the postman comes. With the mail, an envelope from the National Foundation for Infantile Paralysis. Inside, a thin newsletter and a small card. The card asks, "Will you host a March of Dimes collection in your neighborhood this winter?" Dorothy Mills puts the card on the kitchen table. She looks at it while she makes lunch. She picks it up. She looks at it again. She thinks about Robert in his bedroom because Jimmy Kowalski went to the pool. She picks up a pen. She writes, "Yes." Let me show you what the March of Dimes was. Because most people know the name, most people don't know what it actually was. It started in 1938. Franklin Roosevelt, the President of the United States, had polio. He contracted it in 1921 at the age of 39. He was partially paralyzed. He used a wheelchair for the rest of his life. In 1938, as president, he founded the National Foundation for Infantile Paralysis. Its mission: fund research, find a vaccine, stop this disease. The question: how do you fund it? The government provided some money, but not enough, never enough. The disease too big, the research too expensive, the need too urgent. And so the foundation tried something nobody had tried before. They asked ordinary Americans to send dimes. Not dollars, not large donations, not galas and fundraising dinners. Dimes. 10 cents, the amount anyone could afford, the amount a child could afford. They called it the March of Dimes. Eddie Cantor, a radio comedian, coined the phrase on his show. He asked his listeners to send dimes to the president at the White House. The next day, the White House received 30,000 letters, each one containing dimes. The mailroom was overwhelmed. The staff had to bring in extra workers to open the envelopes to count the dimes. 30,000 letters in one day after one radio broadcast, from ordinary Americans who had never been asked to fund medical research before, who sent 10 cents because they could and because their children might be next. Over the following years, the March of Dimes became an institution. Every January, volunteers across America went door to door in their neighborhoods. They carried small cardboard folders with slots for dimes. They knocked on every door. They asked for 1 dime. Most people gave 1. Many people gave more. Almost nobody turned them away, because almost every American knew someone who had been touched by polio. A neighbor's child, a cousin,
a classmate, a friend's sister in the iron lung at the county hospital. The dimes came in, year after year, neighborhood after neighborhood, door after door. Dorothy Mills volunteered from 1952. She walked her neighborhood every January for 3 years. She knocked on doors, she accepted dimes. Her neighbor, whose daughter had survived polio but still walked with a brace, gave 5 dimes. Every year, without being asked, she had them ready. Dorothy Mills collected and sent what she collected to the foundation. The money went to Jonas Salk. Jonas Salk was 39 years old in 1952. He was a researcher at the University of Pittsburgh. He had been working on the polio problem for years, funded by the March of Dimes, funded by Dorothy Mills's dimes, funded by 30,000 letters of 10 cents each. The problem with polio research was enormous. There were 3 types of polio virus. You needed to understand all 3. You needed to kill them or weaken them without destroying their ability to trigger an immune response. The technology to grow the virus in a laboratory did not exist until 1949. John Enders and his colleagues at Harvard developed it. They won the Nobel Prize for it. The March of Dimes had funded that research too. By 1952, Salk believed he had a killed virus vaccine. The virus dead enough not to cause disease, alive enough to teach the immune system what to fight. He tested it on monkeys. It worked. He tested it on children who had already had polio and therefore already had immunity. Their immunity increased, the vaccine working. He tested it on his own children, on himself. Then he proposed the largest medical trial in American history. Over 1 million children across the United States, the polio pioneers. Each one a child whose parents signed a consent form. Each one a child who either received the vaccine or received a placebo without knowing which. Each one a child whose parents understood that this might not work and signed anyway, because the alternative was another summer, another August, another morning of checking how the children slept. Dorothy Mills signed the form for Thomas. He was 6 by then, old enough to understand that he was getting a shot, not old enough to understand what the shot was for. She took him to the gymnasium at his school. There were tables set up along the walls, nurses in white uniforms, a long line of children with their mothers. Thomas got the shot. He cried briefly. He was given a sugar cube and a small badge, Polio Pioneer. Dorothy Mills drove him home. She didn't know if he had received the real vaccine or the placebo. She wouldn't know for almost a year. April 12th, 1955. 10 years to the day after Franklin Roosevelt died. The University of Michigan. A formal announcement. Thomas Francis, Jonas Salk's mentor, stepped to the podium. He read from the report. The vaccine, safe, effective, potent. It worked. The Salk vaccine worked. The announcement was broadcast live on radio and television across America. In schools across the country, teachers stopped their lessons. They turned on the radio. They listened. When the announcement came, some teachers cried in front of their students. They didn't try to hide it. In cities across America, church bells rang. People came out of buildings into the street. Some people hugged strangers. Jonas Salk appeared on television. Edward R. Murrow asked him, "Who owns the patent?" Salk said, "The people." "Could you patent the sun?" He had not filed a patent. He had not sought to profit. The March of Dimes had funded the research. The research belonged to everyone.
Dorothy Mills heard the announcement on the radio in her kitchen. Thomas was at school. Carol was at school. Robert, now 12, was at school. Harold was at work. She was alone in the kitchen when she heard it. She sat down at the kitchen table. She put her hands flat on the table. She sat there for a while. She was thinking about the mornings she had walked to each bedroom, watched each child breathing, adjusted a blanket, gone to make breakfast, not talked about it. She was thinking about Thomas in the gymnasium, the small badge, polio pioneer. She was thinking about her neighbor with 5 dimes already ready. She sat at the kitchen table for a long time. Then she got up. She made a cup of coffee. She had volunteered with the March of Dimes for 3 years. She had knocked on doors she had never knocked on before. She had collected dimes from people she barely knew. And now, the dimes had worked. She drank her coffee. She went to pick up the children from school.
Here is what the archive holds most clearly about the March of Dimes. It was not a charity. It was a decision made by ordinary Americans who had looked at a problem their government couldn't solve and decided to solve it themselves, with dimes. Between 1938 and 1955, the National Foundation for Infantile Paralysis raised $623 million. In today's money, approximately $7 billion. From door-to-door collections, from school fundraisers, from envelopes with dimes, from radio broadcasts, from children's piggy banks. It funded the isolation of the polio virus, the development of the technology to grow virus in a laboratory, the Salk vaccine trial, the distribution of the vaccine. Every step, the dimes at every step. Dorothy Mills's dimes and 27 million other Americans' dimes. The last major polio epidemic in the United States, 1979. By then, the disease that had paralyzed a president and terrified a nation for 20 years was essentially gone. Not because of the government, not because of a single genius, because of the dimes. Because ordinary Americans decided that their children would not grow up in a world with polio. And they were right.
The archive holds one more record. Not the vaccine, not the trial, not the announcement. A morning. Dorothy Mills, Cincinnati, Ohio, August 1953, a Tuesday. She wakes before the children. She walks to each bedroom. She looks at Thomas. She adjusts his blanket. She looks at Carol. She looks at Robert. She goes to the kitchen. She makes breakfast. On the table, her March of Dimes collection folder, already half full of dimes. She collected them yesterday from the houses on Maple Street. She will finish the neighborhood tomorrow. She sends the folder to the foundation at the end of January. She has done this for 2 winters now. She will do it for 1 more winter. And then, in April 1955, the announcement. And then, no more mornings. No more August. No more listening to the breathing of sleeping children before making breakfast. But she doesn't know this yet. It is August 1953. She makes breakfast. She calls the children. Robert comes down first, then Carol, then Thomas. They eat. She watches them eat. Just watches them. The ordinary miracle of children eating breakfast. Still here. Still hers.
That is what the archive held today. Not the story of a vaccine, the story of the people who paid for it, 1 dime at a time. A mother in Cincinnati who checked her children every morning in August, who walked her neighborhood in January with a cardboard folder, who sat alone in her kitchen on April 12, 1955, and put her hands flat on the table and understood that the mornings were over. 27 million Americans sent dimes to the White House. The dimes funded the science. The science ended the summer disease. If this changed the way you see something, share it with one person. That is how this archive grows. I'm Paul, archivist of Paul's Lost Knowledge Empire. Stay curious and keep reading.